When I last uploaded a video about American Evil, I had a comment bring up like the obvious Berserk influences, and that kind of pleased me, right? Because yeah, American Evil is strongly influenced by Berserk. Oh, by the way, I actually have my unopened copy of Berserk 1997 right in front of me. I really got to get around to watching it. But anyway, um, yeah, I did specifically have Berserk in mind. I would say Berserk in general is actually a pretty good influential, pretty big influence on my work in general. Not probably not for the same reason that a lot of other people um are like for me it's like yeah, I really love individual segments and panels and ideas from Berserk, but I don't think the manga like as a whole is all that great. I feel very strongly about that. Like I do think it's not in my top 10. I made a top 10 list and put it on there because it's had such a big impact on me creatively, right? You know, seeing people describe it and talk about it and stuff like that, you know, the shock value and stuff like that. But I don't think the series itself is that great, right? I have like talked about that before, but in a lot of ways, like one of the things that really stuck out to me about Berserk was like the idea of like the eclipse, right? The idea of like your best friend betraying you and then like you know, doing what he did in front of everyone, like ooh, in graphic detail. It was very exciting to me. It was interesting, and things like that really seeing people talk about that stuff really made me influence me to be try to like be a lot darker in my descriptions and my ideas and things like that. It's not on the same level of Berserk because I think Berserk is very try hard in that regard, but like one of the things I do try to do is try to balance like you know the lighthearted nature of anime with like the adventure and the appeal and like the aesthetically pleasing characters and stuff like that. And mesh that with like some of the dark grim reality of like things like Berserk, right? You know that's something like I have a problem with in regards to Berserk is that like the tone is all over the place and it doesn't make whole lot of sense, right? Like I do think it does become a bit too light later on. I do think that like you know Guts and like his growth as a character is just not all that well handled. You know, I do think it's too slowly paced. I do think like but again, at the same time, like there are things that are Kino at the same time, right? You know, like I'll have to reread Berserk and give a thorough like understanding of like my analysis of it because I do have like very specific like ideas on like what works and what doesn't work. But like when I think back to like the influences it had on American Evil, I'm just kind of like, okay, you know, something traumatic happened, and what did Guts do, right? He he left to get revenge, right? He abandoned everything, the last person in the world he cared about, Casca, in the care of someone he barely knew, and then he just bounced, right? Without really explaining why or what happened or what the situation is, right? You know, Guts just leaves, obviously, right? So for me, like I thought with American Evil that like, you know, that a similar thing should happen with like the ritualistic sacrifice and like all of these people dying, and then the opposite happens. You know, the protagonist meets new friends. The protagonist gets stronger. Like with the power of friendship, they overcome this evil. And that's kind of what happens with Berserk too. But again, this kind of like again, it feels kind of forced in Berserk, right? It just feels like the pacing is off with like you know like the flashback sequence with the Golden Age, and then going to Conviction, and then like building the JRPG party. You know, the JRPG party as a concept is something that a lot of Berserk fans have an issue with, but I really enjoyed it. I think like the Falcon and the Millennium Empire arc is actually one of my favorites because like I do like the change in direction. I do a lot of that do like a lot of new characters. You know, I do think, you know, expanding the world outside of Guts makes a whole lot of sense for the manga, right? But with like American, but it feels like disjointed. It feels like it wasn't really set up very well. You know, I do think like the manga does have pacing problems and things like that. So with American Evil, like right from the get-go, like one of my things was that like one of my ideas was that yeah, like the whole like reconnecting with people from a similar situation as yourself would be like an instrumental theme of the novel, right? The idea that the protagonist would have to like you know, get his revenge on these people. But to do that, he essentially has to build his own community, right? He has to like find other like-minded people around him, you know, obtain power, obtain resources, obtain companions, and then strike back against like the evil Ignis witches, right? Like that's essentially what the novel is about. And one of the problems I've been having lately with the book is that like I think there are too many side characters now, so I've been like scaling it back a little bit. But uh, like one of the things I wanted to do was just have like a bunch of different characters with their own skill sets, their own abilities, their own resources, their own things to bring to the table, and just coming together, right? I think with one of the things that makes American Evil so distinct from Berserk in that regard is purely the idea that the protagonist isn't like the center of the story in a lot of respects, right? There are other people who are being victimized by the Coven, like whether they are like going along with it or not, whether they believe it or not, whether they know it or not, right? Everybody is entangled in this web in this city, right? So a lot of people have to come together to fix all of these problems, right? It isn't just about the protagonist in a lot of ways. It is about like the people he brings into it. It is Soleil, it is Elenwe, it is Ichiro. It's everybody in the core cast, right? So for me, like one of the things I really, really wanted to do was just emphasize that these kind of tragedies like affect other people all the time, right? That this kind of thing happens all the time. Like it isn't some freak like unusual thing, right? Like in the eclipse where like Griffith is like, oh, you're the Antichrist. You're destined to do this. Oh, you got to do this. This is like it was predestined to happen. Oh, it's causality. This only happens once every 556 years or whatever, right? Like none of that, right? This kind of like terrible thing happens all the time. It's part of the culture, right? It's an ingrained evil in society and something that straight up has to be purged by force. Otherwise, it's just going to fester and become worse and worse until it manifests itself everywhere, right? Somebody is going to have to deal with it. And that somebody is the protagonist and his friends, right? So for me, like that is my take on it, right? That's again, this was very much influenced by specific aspects of Berserk and stuff like that. And I definitely want to try my best to deliver the best novel possible. But yeah, it's going to be a lot of work, and I still have a lot more to do on that regard before the October release date. But this is definitely, I think, shaping up to be a very entertaining book. I hope you support me and my work going forward.